Hello and welcome back to part 2 of dresser and nightstands build. I've got a few cool things to show you. Let's get going.
All right. There's 14 drawer boxes and 136 dominoes later. Yeah, man. Progress.
These are shop-made handles that I love using, and oftentimes my customers will request them. They're ergonomic, pretty easy to make, and I have a simple yet safe jig for cutting the ends. You can see how these are. Sometimes I do like a sweep, but these are angular because this piece doesn't have very many curves. Well, it doesn't have any curves really. It's very angular for the, this style, mission style or arts and crafts. And I'll leave a link to another YouTube video that I have called Shop Made Handles. I'll leave that in the description. Here you can see how the handle slips into the jig because the tail end is how I have to make the cut. If I was to feed it the other way, it would definitely blow out because that grain would be feeding into the bit instead of away from it. So with this simple jig, I can run it, right side up and then flip it upside down to make that same notch. The angles match. It's a nice smooth cut. And actually in the video I was telling you about, I think I'm doing a sweep rather than this angled notch, but same process.
All right, continuing with the sanding. Now, as I got going, I realized I didn't really need the 120. I was using the 120 with another belt sander, but these are really close to being perfectly flush, and the 180 is doing fine. And yeah, the belt's starting to build up a little bit with glue, but it's still sanding. Now, this is my procedure. I sanded these wide ones first. These would be the stiles, and then I'll come back and do these rails, because as I go across this, I have cross grain scratches here, 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 right? And so now we have to get that out. No big shake, easy with the belt sander. And this rail is, well, this one here is 1 5/16, and this one's only 1 3/16. The reason I did that is because I'm adding a handle that's 3/16 thick, so it will be a total of 1 5/16 when it's on, but they're pretty narrow, but still doable with the sander because it has a nice, beautiful, flat platen. Here we go. And you'll notice when I start, I'm going to concentrate on this area here and sand this because this has already been sanded. So this is slightly higher, a few thousandths maybe. And so I'll sand this first, and then I'll blend this, getting these scratches out, these cross grain scratches here and here, and try not to overlap into this area too much. It'll hit just a little bit of this corner here and here, no big shake. And that's it. I can watch where my platen is, and as I'm sanding this area, this part of the platen curves up here in the front, and in the back there's no, if there's not any pressure where between the platen and the wheel, that's not going to make any contact there. So I can watch that, and so I'm not going past this area and that area, sanding just in here. And then I move the whole belt sander over where the platen is just sanding here. And you can just see where I just put cross grain scratches there and here, just a little bit. But that's a 180 grit, pretty smooth. And so we'll hit it with this dude and that'll all come out.
Oh, and I need to clarify, this is the front. I'm only sanding the front because once the handle's in place, I wouldn't be able to do this. So I'm just doing the front. Once the handle goes on, then I can flush up the backside with this same process.
Now, if I was to take that out in the sunlight and check it, I'm confident that that'll be beautiful with no belt sander scratches. That's it. Once the handle's on and I'm doing the fine detail sanding, I'll break this edge and this one. These were already chamfered prior to the drawer front being assembled. All right, pulling the drawer fronts out of the clamps this morning. Let's see how everything turned out. Let me grab one here. So full squeeze on the back side, perfect. A little bit of glue squeeze on the ends. Right here, there's a little bit of glue squeeze right there and there. That's just about right. And then under here, 0. But everything's nice and tight so we can get these cleaned up. I've got this handle. It's about 3/16 thick right here. And so right here, I just have a little bit sticking out. Probably doesn't show on camera. Actually, let me put some light on there. See a little shadow? Right there. So I've got 3 scrapers here. This is a Baco. I've had this one for years. It barely fits in the sleeve. It's been sharpened numerous times. My buddy Mark Spagnolo was right just enough to send me this one. I really love this scraper. I like the thickness or the thinness, and the tool steel seems to be about right. It really holds a good hook and fantastic. Then this is the Stu Mac. This is the Luthier's scraper. You can see how substantial that is. This one won't bend. I don't know anybody that could bend that, and you wouldn't want to. And that's why I'm using it here. Of course, either one of these would work, but I don't want this to distort at all. This needs to stay flat. And so with something like this, I can find that edge and just pull this.
And since I have 2 different grain directions, I'll attempt to pivot that scraper instead of drawing it across the cross grain.
Till that's flush. Makes sense to me. Rather than trying to bend something, I'd be pushing from that other end, or you could pull, I guess. But let me go around from here. That would work, but anytime you bend a scraper, you're literally, and it's microscopic, but you're literally putting a hollow in the wood if you're not careful. The more you bend, the bigger the concavity that you could create. With something like this, it's going to stay relatively flat because it can't bend. And so that's why I would use it here. And I was putting a piece of tape. Let me grab this shop towel. I was putting a piece of tape on one end, and with that I could just pivot this end. But I went and sharpened it just now. And to sharpen it, I have a video on that. Sharpening this is pretty straightforward. You literally just take this to the grinder, smooth stone, and just tickle this edge. You don't need to create a burr. It's this concave edge that produces this beautiful cutting corner. All right, so this particular drawer front has the handle, obviously, in place. And prior to putting the handle on, I used a straight edge to check this rail to ensure that it was straight and flat. Then I glued the handle on. Now that I'm checking this again, which I like to do, I noticed a small gap on this end. So probably what happened is the handle, let me grab one. Maybe the handle, when I used a hand plane to get rid of the saw marks, I made it slightly thinner on this end. Not a big deal, we can take care of that now. So I could use a hand plane. It's hard for me to tell the direction because this piece is only 3/16, so it's hard for me to see the direction that the grain is running. So I'll use a scraper. And I want to take it easy on this end because this is already slightly thin. Remember the straight edge. You probably can't see it, but a little bit of light coming through. Last maybe 2.5 inches. We'll use this guy. Starting to make sawdust. Probably needs rehooked. That's not bad. So I'm just starting right in here. It kind of digs in, but I want to feather that. So and it doesn't take much. I'm just getting rid of any of those little marks. Let me go to the other side. Let me squeezy. And I'll probably just leave that, and then I can even things out with a sander, or a sand block, I should say. And actually, these were put on, of course, with glue, but I used a 23 gauge. I don't want to hit that with a hand plane. If I hit it with a scraper, not a big deal, which I doubt that would happen. I mean, they're countersunk from the air pressure, but still. Lots of ways to do things, yeah? All right, here it is after a little bit of sandpaper. And you can see this 3/16 part here is just dead flush with the drawer front. And it just virtually disappears. I mean, that little line you see is probably grain because the joint is invisible. All right, on this particular drawer front, I don't see any light on the end, but see how that swivels? Got a little bit of a high spot here in the middle, not bad. But on this particular handle, I can see the grain, on the edge here running up, so I know I'm safe to go this direction. So I can take a couple of swipes out of the middle first, then I'll go a little bit further, lift off with the hand plane, about here and there, and then I can take full swipes. And then one continuous full width shaving, and that should be beautiful.
I've always thought this was really interesting. So when you purchase raw veneer, it is sliced. It's not like shop sawn veneer where you cut that with a bandsaw that is cut with a blade. This stuff is sliced with like a razor blade, a guillotine. And even though they sharpen it after so many passes, it still produces slight amounts of tear out, especially on a figured cut like this figured cherry. It has a little bit of a tear out in between those rows of figure. So yeah, even the big boys with their sharp tools have those issues. And you see me wearing gloves here. That's a great way to keep from burning your thumbs when you're using a scraper. Oh yeah, one other thing. Please realize I'm kidding, right? I do that to keep my brothers from stealing my gloves.
Okay, so here's a sample of the backsplash. This will get cut right along there, and then this will get a cove here as well. So that'll end up going like that, and it should look pretty cool. And I could have just put the cove just here. I thought it'd be more work. I thought it'd look cool doing a little return. We'll see how it looks, but yeah. Okay, crude. I just took this to the table saw and made a series of steps and then scraped that out. It's not a complete cove, but it gives me an idea of what I was after. I believe that will look better than that. Yeah? That's what I'm doing.
So of course, once I'm happy with the sample, I can utilize that to create all these cuts. I make those long rips first, and now we'll make those little cross cuts at the end, just stopping in height short of the cove. Of course, the little Baltic birch just serves as a backup to prevent chip out, right? So hopefully this makes sense, and it'll make more sense here in a little bit. We're going to take these to the bandsaw. So my goal here is to remove most of the waste, just leave enough for the cove. And then here I'm just establishing a cut where the cove would start. With the radius drawn out, this should start to make sense. Of course, the cove at the ends needs to match the cove in the front of the backsplash, so I'm utilizing the same bit. Instead of using the end, I'm using the side of it. I have a stop in place so I don't go too deep, and the bit's getting a little bit dull. You can see a little bit of burning there, but overall not too bad. That'll clean up easily. And this part I cut last, that way it offered the most stability to make that cut. And boom, we have the rough shape. Most of that material's out of the way, and I can use this cove bit or box core bit maybe, and uh, and run these through. Super easy, very effective. I've done this quite a few times, and it works very well.
All right, so here's the countertop, I guess you'd call it, and then the backsplash. This has been hit with a hand plane as well as this edge. So, you know, a joiner is going to make a good joint, but a hand plane will clean up that joiner. Those light scallop marks from the cutter head and produce what we're after is an invisible joint. See how that is just beautiful and tight. Once we glue and clamp that, and we'll make sure we get good glue squeeze, and this can all get cleaned up after this is bonded. Yeah.
Couple of swipes here to remove the jointer marks or saw blade marks, either one, and make it nice and pretty.
All right, I got these out of the clamps. They were in the clamps overnight. Everything looks good, plenty of glue squeeze. Starting to clean this up. This one I hit with a hand plane on the bottom. And then I want to show you, you can see that little bit of a ridge right there, right where the cove is, where it meets the countertop, we can call it. And here at the backsplash, I don't know if that'll show up, but there it goes. You can see another little ridge at the top of the cove. So that's what we have to get flush. You have to be really careful when you're doing this because you can easily dish this low right here in front of the cove. And of course we don't want that. So with some pencil mark in place, I can keep track of my progress.
This is a scraper by DFM Toolworks, and it'll work perfect. It has a 1-inch diameter or a 1/2-inch radius that'll fit that cove. Even though I'm tilting it slightly, it's still a fairly good match. Just about perfect, right? And typically I would make a scraper, but I have this one with the radiuses, and comes in quite handy for something like this or crown molding. Yeah.
So I found this dude in all my sanding blocks, but it's a little bit small. I think it's a 5/8 dowel. Simple, crude, but effective. Just do something like that. But like I said, it's a little bit small. I could take the time to make one. I did find a dowel. So I just checked this. It's a little under 1 inch, which is ideal. This is a 1-inch diameter, 1/2-inch radius. A little bit under, but with some sandpaper, it gets you to about the right size. Now, I don't want to go back and forth on that because that'll make that cove dished in. So I might do that with the finer grits, but this is already smooth. I don't really need to sand that. I just need to blend from the cove to here and from the cove to the countertop, right? So I just go at an angle. And it goes surprisingly fast. So that's 120, and I'll follow up with 180. So by clamping 2 of these back to back, it not only ensures that I'm going to be going, you know, keeping everything 90 degrees and keeping these arises nice and crisp, but also I'm doing 2 at a time, right? So it all adds up. It seems really tedious, but you know, if you start with your parts, you know, where they go together pretty close and everything goes together well, you don't have a lot of sanding to do. Of course, this edge will get all cleaned up. I'm going to put a big bevel on the bottom of this, but I wanted to focus on these coves for a bit. So I have 2 of these tops for the nightstands, right? And I was putting them back to back like this, working on this cove on the end. And it dawned on me I better include this longer one so that I can put them back to back and, you know, do these 2 coves together.
Yeah, I could hit this end grain with a hand plane, but I'm always reaching for a belt sander because it is so effective. And the cuts were really good, and I started with a 120, then moved up to a 180, and then a 220. I go a little bit higher on end grain because wood is porous, more porous on the end, and it can take a little bit higher sanding, especially if you're using stain, which I'm not. But if you're using stain, you want to go higher on end grain. That way that stain won't penetrate into that porous wood and make that area darker. So in case you're wondering, overall 180 is my highest grit, 220 on end grain. I don't remember the exact angle that I put on the bottom of these countertops, but it's not a 45-degree angle. And I needed a way to make sure that they were all very accurate coming in from the outside edge. So by utilizing a block of wood, some arbitrary width, I set the fence, and I put a mark on it, and that mark with the arrow represents the distance from the edge of the slider to the edge of the countertop, so I can check both ends. And actually what I meant to say, it's not a 45-degree or a 30-degree, nothing standard that where I could use a router bit. And truthfully, with this much of a cut, I don't like using a router bit. If I can use a saw, it's going to make it a lot easier to cut and still very easy to clean up. So here's a little secret. So after I sanded all those edges, everything was pretty good. And now that there's just a little bit of material left, I can hit that with a block plane to get any of those sander scratches out. And speaking of sanders, more belt sander action. And you may remember initially I ran these through the drum sander with probably a 120 grit. So now I'm finishing with 180 on the belt, and then I'll make sure there's not any scratches, and then I can finish with the Festool DA orbital. Here I just mark any scratches that I might see. Low raking light, something I preach about all the time. Very effective. You may have noticed in other videos I also have a Dynabrade air sander. That one has a 5mm orbit, or what they call 3/16, I believe, and this one is 3mm, so about half that. It makes a tiny little swirl, if any. Keep your paper clean, change it often, and you won't have any problems. And don't push too hard. And if you have a shop vac with variable suction control, you want to turn that down so it doesn't cause swirl marks. So this is one of the tops for one of the nightstands, and here I'm adding a phone charger. And these are from Doug Mockett. It is hard to find ones that can utilize a thick top. In this case, I had about 3/4 of an inch above the charger, but some of them require just a tiny little space, like 1/8 inch. Some of them were 1/8 inch. I thought that's kind of silly. If you drop something heavy right on that spot, it could punch right through. So these are the ones I went with, and they seem to work very well. I tried a lot of different phones, and they all showed charging really quick. I'll leave a part number in the description. You can see I just added this little strip instead of gluing that wire in. Lots of ways to do things, right? And man, this is getting exciting. Look how beautiful that finish is. This is conversion varnish. I used lacquer for everything else, but I used conversion varnish on the tops because it'll hold up to liquid much better. Conversion varnish is a little bit more finicky to shoot. Lacquer is much easier to shoot, which is why I chose two different finishes. The sheen is the same.
So what I have here is a chest of drawers. This is a solid wood top. And so you may be familiar with these, sometimes called buttons. And so you literally create a slot and anchor this from underneath. And the slot allows a little bit of wood movement. Let me show you under here. There you can see them in the back. And so this top is actually anchored. Let me see if I can get underneath here. You can see the screw hole there. So this rail is attached to this solid in the front. So any expansion and contraction seasonally over this wood top will, expand and contract out toward the back.
You can kind of see how tight that is right underneath the top, and you can kind of see those screw holes where it's attached, actually with glue here in the front. I had a hard time finding kind of a heavy duty but small diameter leg leveler, so I found some that would work, but they were a little bit too big in diameter, so I just ground them down. Quick and easy. The nightstands probably didn't need leg levelers, but I like the way that feels on a floor, especially on a hardwood floor. The chest of drawers absolutely needs them because floors are not flat. Hey, don't be upset, but that is it for this video. You'll have to come back for the finished pieces. Believe me, it'll be worth the wait. I've got a few surprises for you. Remember to click, like, subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.